As the prophet of esports, I rely on trustworthy and meaningful data every day. Data from our research partner YouGov offers the most complete view of esports fans and gamers in the world, providing context to who they are, what they think, the brands they buy, and things they do. YouGov's connected insights and research services inform strategy at every level. If you're a team, a brand, agency, or rights holder, you should be talking with YouGov. Their partners measure and maximize ROI and are telling compelling stories with data. Visit yougov.com/gaming-esports to learn more.
Let's talk about, you guys want to talk about China? Is anyone interested in some of these, any of those three things that we covered on the podcast? Or do we want to jump into something?
I'd rather do new topics, but yeah. Jeff?
Well, I wanted to hear what their takeaway was, because this seems pretty draconian on China, but I can listen to the podcast.
That's for the podcast.
No one really wants to.
No, I think it's worth getting into. I mean, here's the question: how badly does this impact the gaming industry in China? Like, we didn't really go into the business repercussions here.
Well, my memory
if
is
it's actually
was
enforced
up on the announcement. Like, the business implications appear to be Tencent, who I would think is the largest stakeholder to lose because they are most of games, let alone most of games in China, right? And their corporate stock was up 3% on the day. And I know this is correct. I mean, so can you fact check me on this as I share?
I think that is right. I am a Tencent shareholder as of like 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think I'm down money. That also could be because maybe people had sort of feared this, and it was a little bit of like, okay, I don't want to say it's not as bad as people thought because it seems pretty terrible, but maybe it was so bad that like
what were they thinking? Because the next step is they can't play games at all. Like, that's how strict this ban is. So the notion that it wouldn't be priced into the stock price surprises me, right? Like, it just that surprises me. Like, this is, I think, about as strict of a ban as you can get without being an outright ban.
Now, I would say that Tencent did say recently, a couple of weeks ago, that I think only 3% of their revenue comes from people under 18, which to begin with is kind of an insanely low number and really kicks a lot of stereotypes that we have about the industry down the road. But the question I have is whether people think this is actually going to be enforced, or if this is kind of a thing where either people think that everyone's going to play on their parents' account. And we've had this kind of conversation, I think, before. So if you don't want to, we don't have to necessarily do it, but is it going to get enforced, or is it going to be, sort of like this rule is on the books, but it's like jaywalking, where it's like that's not really actually enforced?
That's the point I was going to kind of make, Jeff, is like, I think the reality of the situation might be from a business, like leaving aside any moral or societal or, like anything like that, just from a pure numbers by the business standpoint here. Like, most 18-year-olds don't have a ton of disposable cash, Like, the reality is, I've always thought, and I think, the Tencent number you shared suggests that there's just not a lot of spend. These are free to play games, and these are probably more likely the long tail customers of the free to play space, right? If you think of 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds, there are people who have time to invest in the game, and all these free to play games give you opportunities to substitute time for money. I almost wonder, paradoxically, if this isn't actually good for the games, because now there's a large user base that wasn't spending a lot because they had lots of time. Now their time is finite. Maybe they'll spend more to short circuit things. Maybe they won't have 70 hours to grind to unlock one new character. So if they really want somebody in League of Legends, they'll just buy the League of Legends person they want, right? And then enjoy the 3 hours that they have with that person or that character.
I hear I definitely hear what you're saying on the short term in terms of the business case. Like, hey, you have a wallet to spend. Like, I actually am a pretty big believer in that with gaming. It's like people have a wallet amount that they can spend on this entertainment source, and they will spend it over an hour or 5 hours or 10 hours or 100 hours. So maybe you're right. Maybe revenue doesn't dry up. The problem is, if this is actually enforced and people under 18 are really only allowed to play 3 hours a week, that really kills the habit that people have of gaming, so that when they age up, are they going to be passionate gamers? Probably not. If they're only allowed to do it 3 hours a week, So it's not like magically all of a sudden when they turn 18, they're going to be like, hey, now I want to play 15 hours a week of gaming. Like,
I mean, counter
habit.
Yeah, I agree with you. But counterpoint, when you tell kids they can't do something, that makes it more appealing to do. There's plenty of things you can't do until you're 18 or 21 that become major habits in adulthood, right? Like, look at, I mean, I hate to say it, but the alcohol industry, right? That hasn't been hurt by under 21 bans, I'm not in any way, I'm not in any way likening games to that industry, but like it, but yeah, I think you do raise a compelling argument, which is you're right. The thing that concerns me is, there is some habitual, and I'm also skills development. Like these games are hard to play. If you're coming in cold after, as an 18-year-old, it's tough. Like I think of all the learnings I've had in games and all the time I put in to be not very good at Valorant, right? Like imagine if I was an 18-year-old coming into Valorant and I had no prior experience because I didn't allocate the time. Like, but then the counterpoint is that will change how games are designed, right? There'll be games that are better set up for 18-year-olds and their onboarding experiences. But I don't know. I mean, it is like it is.
Here's an interesting thought exercise. Is there a world where this is really bullish for like Huya, DouYu, the streaming companies? Because if kids under 18 can't play games, well, what's the next best thing? They're just going to watch people play games because they want to be involved in the gaming culture, but they can't actually play games. So they're just going to essentially go on Twitch and watch games all day rather than play them. Is that like a second derivative?
Well, yeah. And
interesting play there.
I think that's actually a really interesting point, Jeff, is I think the thing I think is you probably like, if this is an attempt to stamp out the influence that games have on youth, I don't think this does that. I just don't, because there's so much more built up around games and games culture that I think limiting playtime in and of itself doesn't address all the other touch points people have with games. I think you're right. It might lead to substitution. I think that's a very direct argument. Like one of the reasons I watch Twitch is when I can't game, right? Like I'm in bed and I want to go to sleep and I want to play an active experience, or, oh, I don't have long enough to do a queue here, but I can probably drop into so-and-so stream for 5 minutes between meetings at work and just see what's going. Like it's filling a time for me when I can't play games. I think that's very interesting that the winner here is the substitution media. The direct substitute is probably watching people play games. You're right. I might. That's a very smart point.
Who's streaming on Huya and DouYu?
People over 18. What do you mean?
Yeah.
You don't think they have people streaming on there?
I think he wants you to name someone.
I just don't think these are direct substitutes. I don't think the kid who can't play anymore says, well, I'm going to go spend 6 hours watch. People watch people playing games because they have a passion for the game, right? You watch someone playing Apex because you really like, for the most part, playing Apex. And I think if you don't have learned behavior around gaming, because gaming is learned behavior, it's what you get used to. If you don't grow up on that, you're not going to consume that as entertainment. I just think it will have no effect. Like you guys are making the argument that this isn't going to have a massive negative impact on the gaming industry in China. This effectively kills the gaming industry in China. There is no future for gaming in China. And anyone investing there right now is going to lose their shirt, or the risks are so high, it makes absolutely zero sense to be investing there. And just, I mean, look at when you have the biggest Chinese gaming company on the planet, right? And I'll bring this article up, Tencent, right? If anyone's going to be bullish on the Chinese market, it's going to be Tencent, and they're investing outside of China, right? That says here, Tencent has more than 7-fold more investment in foreign startups this year. So they're investing heavily outside of China. I don't know why anyone, unless you're on the ground in China and you have connections in the government and you understand the regulatory environment and risks there, I don't know why anyone in their right mind would be touching China with a 10-foot pole right now. It's radioactive.
You think it's that serious? You think it's like games are over in China?
I think being able to build a business around gaming in China is dead today. I don't think there's any point to do it. If you're Chinese, if you're living there, you understand the risks, you understand the environment, you can navigate it, you have the connections, sure, right?
Well,
But if you're a VC sitting in San Francisco wondering where I should put my dollars in gaming, China should not be on your radar.
Well, I would argue that was probably the case before this, because this was always a risk. But I don't necessarily. You may not be wrong about your first statement. That was obviously a hot take, which I love. I feel like your second statement would be true regardless if this news was out. Like, investing in areas where you're not an expert in general is a bad idea, probably.
Yeah, but you'd be amazed how many investors ignore what is genuinely good advice.
Juice owns Tencent and Huya in his investment portfolio, and is not an expert in China. So,
Christian says, "My question is if there are exceptions to the 3-hour policy and how this policy impacts the talent pipeline for esports." I mean, I don't know I don't know about exceptions. There weren't any mentioned in the article. In terms of talent pipeline, I think it kills it, right? Again, you can't become a great esports champion playing 3 hours a week.
I think that might be the most significant knock on for this is, like, very few people walk into baseball at 18 years old, and like very few people haven't played baseball and then just start in college and go on to MLB, right? Like, these are life development things. I think that's the clearer knock on to me. The business side, I'll enjoy playing both sides of the fence and thinking about it from a theoretical perspective because it's fun to do mental gymnastics to make this positive. But on the esports side, I think it's tough to remain competitive when your talent pipeline is effectively non-existent,
There's a lot of speculation, there's just uncertainty as to the infrastructure, as to how they're going to regulate it, as to the workarounds. When certain websites were blocked, VPNs came up and other masking softwares. To William's point, when you deny something, kids tend to find a way anyways. It makes it more appealing. Uncertainty as to, as a Christian statement just now, exceptions to the policy, right? Maybe there's certain teams that represent China, like a Chinese team in the Overwatch League, and so they grant them an exception to train because they're representing their country, right? Similar to an Olympic exception. So I feel like there's a lot of skepticism, a lot of uncertainty rather, as to what they can even regulate. I think we had covered numerous stories on facial recognition software to determine age, right? Maybe they move to mobile. Is the scanning the same for mobile? Maybe they use their parents' account. On its face, right? It's an inflammatory article, right? It's terrible on its face if you just read the headline. If you give it a year or two to see what China does to enforce this, what people are doing to get around it, what concessions are made or exceptions are made, still terrible for the esports industry in China. Still, like, no way around that, but perhaps not nail in the coffin just yet. I'm not so sure yet. So that's why I've been quiet and on the fence, is just like, this is the first article, right? And it's terrible on its face. And if I, as someone that tried to do a lot of business in China in my first 2 years in esports, I can, in retrospect, be like, thank God Paul pulled me away from that and had me focus elsewhere, because these were the concerns we were dealing with 2-3 years ago, where like you said, everyone knew that this was always the risk, and we were trying to do it anyways because it was so lucrative. It was so massive. There were so many people gaming. Even if the sponsorship dollars were 10 cents on the dollar to what they are here, they were 10 times as big. So we knew we'd make up for it. But this was always the risk. So again, I want to see this develop a little bit further and answer some of those questions. But I think any way you slice it, it might not be as bad as we think, but it's still not good. That doesn't make it a good thing.
Ramsey says, that's what baffles me. Why did they go straight for gaming and not look at a ban on screen time in general, or social media / watching YouTube? I just think those things aren't enemies anymore, right? Like, it's the rotating cast of, what is corrupting our children. And it was rap music, and then it was Facebook, and then it was, and now it's gaming. And so gaming's the enemy. So they'll dump on gaming for the next 5 or 10 years. They'll kill any chance of an industry developing there. And then, they'll come around and realize that, someone younger will have a government post there and realize gaming is not, corrupting youth to the point that it needs to be banned, and it'll change. I just think it's sort of a life cycle in these heavily regulated, communist countries where there doesn't have to be good reason around things. Because Ramsey, your point's a good one, right? Like, why one and not the other? I think you're looking for logic in a place where there is none.